So welcome guys, we are looking at the demo for Hira Hira Hihiru. Usually I do visual novel demos over on the other channel, but today we're doing it here because I can't be bothered to go get the unicorn. At the front of the room stood an altar and a coffin holding a body of the deceased. Pale smoke drifted from the sticks of incense that had been placed by the bereaved as an offering. Hold on, let me see. Is it too low music? I don't think so. I think that should be fine. A priest was reciting a sutra, punctuating his chant with sounds of his instrument. The family, clad in white attire, was sat in rows by the altar. There they offered their thanks to each guest who went up to burn incense at the stand placed on the elevated platform. The man who looked to be the chief mourner was sat at the end of the row, legs bent politely beneath him. His gaze tended downward, making his upper body sway like a willow branch. The color had all drained from his pallid skin, making it appear like he might collapse at any moment. Perhaps having taken note of the man's sickly state, a young man in a black school uniform quietly passed behind a row of sitting family members and crouched behind the chief mourner. He whispered something into his ear, perhaps telling the older man that he could rest. But the chief mourner did not budge. With nothing else to say at such refusal, the young man simply took a seat behind him. The head priest continued to recite the sutra in the clear, sonorous voice. Occasionally, he would pick up two hand cymbals, lightly striking them, before stifling the clear, ringing sound by rubbing the instruments together. There was a brazier in the room, but since the doors were left open for the guests, it was no warmer inside than out. Each time the wind came blowing in, the tips of the incense sticks would burn brightly red and sent a trail of white smoke wafting through the room. It was then the chief mourner shifted himself, turning to face the young man in the school uniform directly behind him. "Close the damn door." From his pocket he produced a small drawstring pouch, which he held out to the young man. As the realization set in, a look of surprise bordering on distress spread across the young man's face. Eyes clenched with grief, he took the pouch. As soon as he realized his eyes were blotting with wet, glistening sorrow, the young man cast his gaze downward to hide it. He bit his lip and creased his brow, as if fighting hard to rid himself of the sudden flood of emotions. A gust of wind rushed into the room. The candles standing at either side of the altar were snuffed, leaving only wisps of pale smoke. Then, just as the man from among the family members stood up and reached for the matchbox to relight the candles, it happened. From the coffin came a faint, shaking sound. The chief mourner and the young man were right by the coffin, were the only ones who looked up at the truly soft noise. Unperturbed, the man who'd picked up the matchbox tried to grab a match from inside. The head priest's melodic chanting continued unchanged. The other relatives only had eyes for the guests, giving their condolences at the incense stand. Neither the man holding the match, nor the head priest, absorbed in his chanting, nor the other family members had noticed the sound. But the chief mourner and the young man who were staring at the coffin with tense expressions. It was fine, unvarnished coffin with a beautiful wooden grain. And under their unbroken gaze, a rattling sound erupted from the coffin once more. The noise was louder this time. The man stopped trying to strike the match, and the head priest stopped his chanting to actually look at the coffin in front of him. Though the room was now smothered in silence, the rattling noise pressed on. Before long, it was obvious to everyone what was happening. The coffin lid was moving right before the very eyes of all those gathered there. The coffin lid shifted, little by little, accompanied by the noise of wood scraping. Something inside was trying to push the lid open to get out. And there was little question as to what might be within the coffin at a funeral. The coffin's lid was pushed aside, and out from the gap between four thin white fingers, a middle-aged woman sitting by the wall let out a scream. The next moment, the coffin lurched up on one side and then tumbled off its stand. When it did, all the adornments placed in front of the coffin got taken down within an enormous clatter. Jumping out of the way in surprise, the head priest landed on his backside atop the tatami floor, where the priest had stood just a moment earlier. Now laid the coffin on its side. The deceased within had tumbled out into the center of the room. Can I? Is there a way to actually just look at the image? Oh, there we go. The body, dressed in white, had fallen face down on the floor in the middle of the assembled family and guests. Messy hair sprawled out atop the tatami. Her hair was pure white, like thread of silk. Yeah, I can see why Kisa would be mad if you tried burying her. But the surprising thing was, though her hair was as white as fallen snow, the girl wasn't old at all. The skin on the thin, pale legs protruding from her white clothes didn't sag at all, and the back of her neck, now exposed, was smooth and clear, without so much as a wrinkle. It looked every bit like the body of a teenage girl. She twisted her body about and struck both hands against the tatami floor in an attempt to lift herself up, but she didn't have the strength to raise her body. A small voice barely escaped from the girl's mouth. She tried to put more force into elevating herself, but only succeeded in making her elbows quiver, unable to get herself up. Now prone again, the only thing she could manage was to lift her head. In front of her was that young man in the school uniform. Dressed in all black, he provided a stark contrast to the crowd of family members in white attire around him. The young man was so startled he could do nothing but return the girl's stare while frozen in place. The eyes that peeked from between the strands of hair were bright, full of light, and intensely focused on the young man in front of her. Their gazes remained interlocked for a time before the girl looked back down and attempted to put her strength into both arms again. Her elbows shook even more violently than before. The zombie has made everyone deaf. With a tremendous yell, the girl's body managed to raise herself up just a bit, but almost immediately her strength left her, and she dropped back down with a thud. There she remained limply, her breath turned into ragged gasps as she laid flat on the floor.
Hihiru!
One of the family shouted out. I like this so far. This looks weird. This is weird. This is called Hira Hira Hihiru. This is a demo that we're looking at. A pale winter sunlight filters in through the window. A stove sits at the end of the classroom, warming the frigid air, the coal burning inside it gleaming like molten lava. With the heat comes an irresistible desire for slumber. My eyelids cling to each other as though they've been glued shut. I furrow my brow and force them apart. Light floods into my open eyes. I don't sleep much these days. I was on night duty last night, meaning I had to remain at the hospital and be ready to respond to any emergencies. If nothing happened, I would have been allowed to sleep through the night, but such uneventful shifts are rare. This past evening was no exception. As soon as I managed to drift off to my much-needed sleep, I was notified that a patient had collapsed in the private hospital. After attending to that, I returned to the night duty room and laid down on the futon, only to have the nurse come looking for me as I was nodding off. This time, the crisis was a patient in one of the isolation units having an outburst. And that's how I spent my night, with little chance of rest. When morning arrived, I came here to observe the lecture. At the podium stands a man with a long nose and a sharp gaze. His face brings to mind that of an eagle. His name is Dr. Shuhei Katori. Currently the most well-respected academic in the country, he gives 2 lectures a week, one clinical and one theoretical. Today's class is the former. His classes were popular back in my school days, and it seems his favor has not faded. Though the classroom isn't big, managing to fill every seat with a topic like this is no small feat. As thrilled as I am to see this many people attending a lecture about the typically unpopular subject of aerodema, I wonder how many of the audience will go into the field after they graduate. I suspect many of them are only here for the chance to witness the rare spectacle, to satiate their curiosity with the hair-raising sight that awaits. Most of the students here are enrolled in medical school, but there are some humanities students mixed in as well. Aerodemia studies must be available as an elective to students of philosophy and psychology. Watching them, I get the impression that the humanities students are more enthusiastic about the lecture. One might assume this is because they chose to take this course of their own accord, but I dare say it's because there isn't much overlap between aerodema and the fields of philosophy and psychology. 1 second. In any case, all the students appear to be rather restless, likely due to the fact that today an actual patient will be visiting the school. While it is possible to come upon victims of aerodemia out on the streets, those with the serious symptoms are rarely seen, as they tend to avoid the outdoors. Continuing to fight the pull of sleep, I listened to Dr. Katori's lecture.
諸君もよく知っているように、古来この病の患者はヒヒルだの、腐れだのと呼ばれ、人間ではなく妖怪や悪霊の類とされていた。これを疾病と認定し、医療の対象としたのは、この長い人類の歴史からすれば、ごく最近のことである。
When I actually, if we buy this game, I have to make the screen bigger, that's all. Dr. Katori speaks in a solemn tone.
風乱症は全く他に類を見ない特殊な病だ。死んだはずの人間が葬式の間によみがえって棺の中から起き上がってくる。土葬した墓の中で出してくれ出してくれとわめき始める。そうして再び動き始めたその人物は精神も肉体も以前とはすっかり変わっている。人には見えないものが見えて、それと対話し、青白い死体そのままの肉体は代謝が衰え、時間とともに腐敗し、悪臭を放つ。
He clears his throat and continues.
太古は神や自然の精霊といった神聖なものが入り込んだと考えられ、尊ばれ、崇められた。時代が下るに従って、怨霊や動物霊などの下道で卑しい霊の仕業とされるようになり、忌まれるようになった。この本法におけるヒヒルという俗称も、語源を遡れば決して悪い意味ではなく、まだ崇められていた時代から使われていたということが昨今の研究で判明している。もっとも今では神聖な意味合いでその言葉を使うものはごくわずかだがね。
The doctor projects his voice like a trained actor. The students are silently giving him their rapt attention.
これは本法のみならず世界のどこでも事情は変わらない。人間というものはね、国に関わらず迷信深いものなのだよ。統計的に見ると歩く死体というような意味の言葉が当てられることが多いようだ。だけれど その死体を動かすものが何かということについては地域ごとの違いがあるようだ。例えば悪魔を恐れる地域では悪魔の仕業とされ、呪術がはびこる地域では誰かの呪いだとされ、体にハエがたかる様からハエの化身と呼んだ地域もあった。いずれにしろ社会に歓迎されるものではなく、患者はどこの地域でも迫害され、発症した途端に再度殺害されるということも珍しくはなかった。
I do wish I could make the writing a little bigger, but I see with everything that how they're doing this. This is a pretty unique way of doing a visual novel, and I like that. So this is a bit different than how we normally see it. Dr. Katori pauses to pour water from a pitcher into a glass. He wets his throat as he carries on.
しかし、この迷信の時代は終わらせなくてはならん。現在、風蘭症は宗教ではなく医学の扱う分野となった。これまで死体が動き出したと考えられていた現象は、一旦仮死状態になっただけのことだ。そして、霊との対話と思われていたものは、妄想や幻覚といった精神症状であり、体が腐るのは死体だからではなく、代謝の異常によって組織が崩壊しているのである。感冒になれば発熱するように、風蘭症になれば症状が発現する。これは悪霊とも悪魔とも本人の行いとも何の関係もない。こういった観点に立つと、我々は長い間不幸な患者をそうとは知らずに怪物として嫌悪し、虐げてきたということになる。これほど恐ろしいことがあるだろうか。
You're gonna say, this is all in the test, you better be taking notes, Jack. An angry scowl appears on his face as he surveys his audience, as though one responsible for this injustice is in the very room.
この事実に人類は深く反省し、現在はどの先進国も風蘭症患者の救済に取り組んでいる。我が国もその後塵を排してはいられない。だが悲しいかな。現状はこの国の患者への理解は極めて低い。民衆はまだまだ風蘭症を怪物のように思っているし、知識人とされる者の中にもおとぎ話のような知れ事を口にしてはばからない者がいる。中世の頃と何も変わっていない。しかし私がこの教室で講義している内容は世界的な水準に比肩しうるものだ。最先端の研究結果に基づいている。つまり今ここで学んでいる諸君らは帰宅する頃にはすでにそのあたりの知識人よりも優れた見識を得ているというわけだ。心してくれたまえ。
I have heard this preamble many times before while I was a student myself. It is almost comforting to hear it again. Dr. Katori takes another drink of water before diving into the heart of his lecture. This being a clinical lecture, he explains in thorough detail, gestures and all, how he examines a patient for areodema. He speaks without pause, his voice rising and falling to match the emotions behind his rhetoric. Simply listening to him makes it feel as though the scene is unfolding before our eyes. With each dramatic movement, his long hair sways behind him. Hi, Kiwi. Touch your nose. Sorry, doggy time. This orator-like speaking skill is the secret behind the popularity of Dr. Katori's lectures. He shares his account of a raging patient who could not be sedated no matter what medicines they tried, and from his mouth it sounds like an amusing antidote. Ah, this is something I could never do. Something I have stood behind many podiums. I've never had a way with words like this. Idle jealousy creeps into my drowsy mind as I watch the doctor perform. But I wonder, when will the patient be revealed? I admit I did not come here only to hear Dr. Katori speak. I'm here to observe my patient, for the aerodemia victim the doctor has promised to introduce to the students as a patient of mine. My lethargy and fatigue are growing worse, and my impatience are all the more. But then the moment finally arrives.
さて、それでは実際の患者と会ってもらおう。
Dr. Katori claps his hands once. On cue, Nurse Suzuki enters the room, leading the patient in by hand. A mere 25 years of age. Nurse Suzuki is young, with broad shoulders and a muscular build. His strength is particularly helpful when a patient becomes manic, but this one seems calm enough that it won't be needed today. The patient, who refers to as Osan, enters slowly, his frail frame bent over itself. Oh, dear Lord! Oop, wrong button. A gasp ripples across the audience. Osan's skin is inflamed from head to toe, looking as though it is covered in severe burns. Its surface is brown with decay. His eyelids have been stripped away, leaving his eyeballs almost completely bare. He has to move his entire brow to simply blink, contorting his face into a fearsome scowl each time. Even his lips are crumbling away, no longer capable of hiding his white teeth. This figure, wrapped in a cotton hospital gown, shuffles into the room. At a glance, one might think him a mummy or a rotting corpse. Let's continue. A patient with such advanced symptoms is rare these days, now that we have means to slow the disease progress. Of the nearly 450 patients in this hospital, few are in as bad condition as this, and those who are, most are bedridden. This is perhaps the only patient we have who is severely afflicted, yet strong enough to walk on their own. His movements are dreadfully slow, of course, his feet dragging on the floor as he walks. Still, he makes his way to the podium on his own, and he stands beside Dr. Katori, head hung low and facing the students. Although Osan is about the same in stature as the doctor, who himself has more of a Western build than a Japanese one, his body is folded into a low bow. He holds the pose for a long while, the students watching him with bated breath. His bowed head reveals that his scalp has rotten away, exposing the white of his skull to the open air. This is not due to aerodemia, but the result of a treatment called moxibustion. He underwent in his youth a traditional healing therapy involving burning dried mugwort leaves on one's skin. Back then, it was believed to be effective against aerodemia. Thus, his father put a large lump of mugwort on his head and lit it aflame. His father deserved to bear the blame, of course, but Osan is the one who sat quietly as the flesh of his head burned. Such thick-headedness is also a symptom of aerodemia, horrible as it is. I once questioned him about it. I asked whether any sort of instinctual responses came to mind when he saw the flame being lit upon his head. Did he not feel panic? Did he not think of putting it out?
煙がもくもくと天井に昇っていくのをぼーっと眺めていたらね、他のことは考えられなくなっちゃって。
He shrugged simply as he gave me his answer. This may be the most carefree creature I've ever met, I thought, and I nearly laughed, then remembering his brain was nearly boiled in his skull, found myself unable to eke out a single chuckle.
今日は私の講義にご協力していただいてありがとうございます。あなたのおかげで前途有望な学生たちの知見が深まり、将来この国の風乱症患者たちの苦しみを減ずることとなるでしょう。
After introducing Osan to the students, Dr. Katori thanks him in his usual dramatic tone.
いやー、そうですか。ありがたいことです。
Osan replies is vague, delivered in a dazed tone. It is unclear how much of the situation he understands. Nevertheless, his responses cause a mild commotion amongst the students. It seems that they are surprised that a patient with such advanced ariodemia is able to speak, let alone have a conversation. It can talk, one person says. He must be receiving some special treatment at the hospital, another whispers. I find myself surprised at their surprise, taken aback by how little they know, but I suppose it is natural for those who have little contact with the affected. Surmising the cause of the students' chatter, Dr. Katori glares at the audience.
諸君がこんなことで驚くというのが、まさに世間が風乱症患者に対してどれだけ無理解かということを証明している。
His sharp words restore silence to the lecture hall.
風乱症患者はその病によって言葉を失ってしまう患者もいるが、街を歩くことができるような患者は一見かなり肉体の崩壊が進んでいても会話くらいはできる能力を持っている。もっと症状の軽い街の患者がほぼ黙っているのは喋ればバカにされるからだよ。症状のせいで普通の人よりは多少おかしなところも出てしまう。それをあげつらわれるうちに卑屈になり喋らなくなってしまうのだ。
The doctor's speaking grows more animated.
諸君らがまず最初に理解しなくてはならないのは、彼らだって我々と同じ人間だということだ。どんな姿形になろうとも心はあるし、意志もある。症状が穏やかな時ならば、意志の疎通だってできる。確かに彼は心の症状は少ない部類ではあるのだが、彼よりもっと重い精神症状のある患者でも、たとえ幻覚や幻聴に惑わされ上事をつぶやいていても、糞便をつかみ全身に塗りたくっていたとしても、その根底には我々と変わらぬ心があるのだ。ヒヒルだ腐れだのもののけの類のように言われてきた彼らだが、その一人ずつに父があり母があり兄弟があり人生がある。尊ぶべき個人なのだ。いくら学説を学び知識を集めたとしても、その尊ぶべき人間の魂を心で感じ取ることができなければ、この病を理解することは不可能だ。今日諸君にはそれを体験して帰ってもらう。
It's done very much differently than most visual novels. I wasn't expecting this, but I can't say I'm against it. I like this so far. The tear rolls down Dr. Katori's cheek as he brings his speech to a close. Silence overtakes the room. I confess I am not partial to the doctor's methods. As eloquent as he is, making an impassionate appeal to emotion makes this no different from a carnival freak show. A small dark tent in which a showman promises his audience a glimpse of the most pitiful beast in the world. He spins for them sensational yarn about the creature's tragic life, bringing tears to his own eyes. Once he's captured their curiosity, he lifts the curtain, presenting the oddity in all its hideous glory. Is that not what we just witnessed here? Osan was no more than a spectacle to put on display. While I do have the utmost respect for Dr. Katori, I have nothing but distaste for his dramatics. Of course, I understand that he is aware of all that, and that his choice to dramatize his lectures to capture his students' interest is the correct one. After all, it is an effective way to achieve the ultimate purpose of these classes. Still, it makes me uncomfortable. I cannot say that I fully believe in the doctor. From time to time, I find myself unsure of his true intentions. Osan is standing at the front of the classroom, staring into space, although unaware of why he is here. I have been studying his expression closely. He has been stable as of late, but that is all the more reason not to be careless. His mental condition is generally steady, but about once a month he becomes terribly unhinged. Last month he had to be put in the isolation unit 3 times. This is the first time he has participated in one of Dr. Katori's lectures. Come to think of it, when was the last time he saw anyone who was not another patient or someone working at the hospital? He is allowed to leave the hospital freely, but he prefers not to. At most, he leaves once every few months and merely walks around the hospital grounds for a few minutes. After that, he is constantly in his ward. Although he has been brought here as an example of how calm ariodemia patients can be, the fact remains that he is a patient with serious conditions who must be treated with care. Not even I could predict how he might react to being paraded before a room full of students. The doctor dismissed my concerns, saying that whatever happens would be a worthwhile experience for them. He believes that the potential this behavior has to inspire the students to save many lives in the future justifies a single patient's discomfort. Needless to say, I am unconvinced. It seems Osan has not noticed me sitting in the back of the room. He is absent-mindedly staring at the students, answering only about half of Dr. Katori's questions. This is not due to any discomfort from being in an unfamiliar situation. It is simply his usual disposition. He appears neither nervous nor afraid. If things carry on like this, there should be no issue. The lecture continues with Osan speaking about himself in his listless tone, as well as interacting with the students directly. Having lived half of his life with a terrible disease, he has no shortage of gruesome antidotes to share. The students appear to be deeply moved, some heaving heavy sighs, others holding their heads in their hands. He has shown no signs of breaking down, so it seems my fears will not come to pass. Once his part has been played, Osan leaves the classroom. Stifling a yawn, I raise to my feet. The frigid January wind chills me to the bone the moment I step out the door. So that's where we're going to leave it. So we may look at this demo more next time. If you guys want to see this whole game, let me know in the comments, and I'll see about picking it up. Thank you guys very much for joining me. Bye.